Welcome back, Mark Sargent again, and we have this empty canvas, and our goal is to create a ZSphere figure. And so let me start. So instead of this simple brush, I will use a ZSphere as a starting model. So I'm starting dragging it out, and instantly, because I want to edit this ZSphere, I'm pressing T to enter edit mode. Shift P to show the floor plan, and turning off the XYZ rotation. Just navigating using only the Y-axis, and definitely need a perspective. Going up to the draw mode, and angle of view is lower than 40. And because I don't like the gradient background, no. So once we have this model, uh, there's something we have to take care of, and that is symmetry. So the hotkey for turning on symmetry is X, and by default its symmetry is working on the X-axis. So what you're doing on the right side will be mirrored to the left, and vice versa. Okay, now when you are creating a Z-sphere figure, you're starting from the hips, 90%. So if this is a hip, we are trying to create a spine for the figure. The blue axis, the blue vector, points to the camera facing us. So this will be the front of the figure. Keep that in mind. Now, we don't have to worry about the size of the Z-sphere, because by default ZBrush automatically sets these measurements. So if you are not importing something into ZBrush, usually you have no problem with sizing. Okay, now if I want to work in symmetry, I have to take care of the snapping. So as you see, snap occurs, so I can start to draw my next joint. Let me switch this ugly red material to something more smoother set. So this one's drawn, and I have to switch back and forth between moving, scaling, and rotating. So it is time to use the hotkeys. So if you're switching on W, now you can move the joint that you created. And as you see, you have this first joint, the second one, and between them there is a link. There is an automatically generated connection. So this might be the waist of the figure. If I want to add more, I have to switch back to draw mode. So I'm pressing Q, going and keeping it in the symmetry line. So I have to make sure that the cursor snaps. Then dragging out the model, I don't stop the movement. If you stop the movement like this, it will be a very small joint, and it's much harder. You have to go in, scale it up, change it. So it's just a waste of time. When you create the joint, try to create it right at the side. So if you want to be a bigger, because it's a chest, make it bigger, switch to move, lift it up, and that might be the chest. Probably this needs to be a little bit smaller, so I'm switching to scale, scaling down the hips a bit, and scaling up the chest a bit more. Okay, now how to add limbs, how to add the arms. We are going back to Q, draw mode, selecting, starting from the side, drawing out these points, and then switching again to move and pull them a little bit apart from the chest. The goal here is to use only the necessary amount of Z-spheres. If you're creating too many Z-spheres, that's simply pointless. It just makes your life a little bit messed up. So what you want to do is just create the pieces that you need, and that's all. Okay, now here I'm in draw mode. I've created a small link, and let me show a typical kind of an issue that comes with Z-spheres. So if you have a larger brush, this larger brush is you are in move mode. This larger brush acts like a kind of a magnet. So if you drag this point and you're trying to create the arms, you want to drag this joint, but because the brush is way too large, you will drag the shoulder joints too and not just this ending. So you have to rescale your brush size, reduce the size. Now you can move this almost independently, and that's it. So if you have small Z-spheres bunched up, then you want to make sure that you're selecting um, um, the perfect, the necessary joint. Then you might have to scale down your brush size, and it's easier to pick up a joint. Now, what happens if you forgot to add a joint? For example, I have a missing elbow joint here. Now, how to add? You have to switch back to draw mode, and if you have a link that's connecting two joints, if you click wherever you want, it will create a joint there, and then you can move it as you wish. Now this is my elbow point. Now how to create a head? The head is a little bit, I don't say it's tricky, it's just you have to pay attention. So going back to draw mode and creating the neck fundament, the base for the neck at the center. So make sure your cursor snaps, start dragging it out, and this will be the fundamental joint of the neck. But I don't want to lift this up. If I lift this up, my preview, let me show the preview. If you press A, it will show the preview of your model, and this preview will be like a bit more conic. So can you see this cone? Now usually a neck is much more cylindrical, it's not like a cone as this. So if I'm pressing again A, I can turn off the preview, select the move, pull it back a bit, and start a new one again. Oh, that is right at the center. Drag it out and pull up this one. And this is a good neck. So if I'm turning on a preview now, this is a good neck. It's quite thin, but it is much better than the previous one. And what do I miss? I miss the head. Now, if I want to add a head, I can add the head on top of this, like Q, creating huge sphere. But one thing you have to pay attention. When you have overlapping items, so I have this big ball joint here, this big Z-sphere, but under this big Z-sphere there is another one, a tiny one here, and if these two are overlapping, my preview could be really messed up. Okay, so can you see how this sphere starts to rotate because of the overlap? Now you will try to avoid this rotation. You want to get rid of it. Now I really messed up the thing, so if I want, I need to delete this sphere, this particular sphere, because there's so strong overlap. Okay, now I can repair it. So it's a little bit harder to drag the joints, but I will try anyway. Pull it up, okay, and pull it back, and now this is a correct setup for a head. So this is the solution that's working. So I can scale it up a bit more, a bit higher, scaling up this neck joint a bit also. Just the neck joint, sometimes it's harder to select. Okay, it has a tendency to lock, but okay, now this is a good head. Alright, we were using simple moves and simple scales, but what happens if you are moving and not grabbing a joint but grabbing a link instead? If you're grabbing a link, everything that is attached to that particular link will be moving. Okay, so if I'm dragging this link and start moving it up and down, I can manipulate my model. So you have to be careful with this because it's just not so easy to adjust everything, but you can done it this way. But if you're selecting the joint and just the joint, by default only the joint moves. Now if you are holding down Control and selecting the joint, everything that's attached to the joint will moving as well. So if I'm selecting the shoulders and just tapping on the shoulder joint, only the shoulder will move. But if I'm holding down Control and selecting the shoulder, everything else will move too. Okay, take a look at the posture of the figure. I like it. Maybe the hips should be a little bit forward. Shoulders a bit relaxed to the front. Oh yeah. Okay. Now this guy is just pretty cool. So it's time to add the legs. Now for the legs, a typical joint for the legs when we are dealing with the ZSphere is kind of like in a normal way in real life. So we have a side thrust, and okay, just let me make it a little bit bigger, and switching to move instantly. So this is the hip actually, and we are starting from the legs from here. Now if you see the floor, you don't have to be worried about this, because if you're extending the figure to this lower direction, this floor will automatically update. Okay, so as you change the view, if you pull it more, it will automatically update and moving it lower and lower. I will use the same technique as I did with the arms. So I will drag it out because right now I'm curious about the overall length. So let me make it longer. I want to make it a kind of a funny figure with long limbs. So the arms. Okay. And now let me add the knees. So how to add the knees? Go to Draw Mode, Q, and just tapping on the area you want to knees. If you want to add or if you want to remove, you're holding down Alt key for removing, and that will remove the specific joint or the entire element if you have something attached to the joint. Okay, now let me do the necessary modifications. So if you want to add some volume for the thighs, for example, you can add another ZSphere in the middle, go to the scale it up. But one thing you always want to keep in mind, so if you press the preview will show you that if you have elements too close, just let me show it. So let me increase the size of these and even move them too close. So I'm pressing A. These can melt together. It is coming. This is a result of the Dynamesh. So because we are using a Dynamesh here as a preview, it can cause some trouble if you have elements that are too close. The other thing you want to keep in mind, let me go off from the preview, undo the changes. I've used Ctrl Z, or you can use here the timeline, but once you have a couple hundreds of history elements, it's quite hard to adjust it accurately. So Ctrl Z is always working, and Ctrl Shift Z is going forward. So if you're not using an English system, there's a chance that ZBrush will switch to English, so that Ctrl Z will switch remapped on your keyboard to Ctrl Y, so that might happen. Okay, now what we are looking for is creating the legs and positioning the arms. So legs, back to draw mode, actually the feet. So this is the front. We need a heel, so heel is usually looking like this. So back in draw mode, drawing it out, moving it out, skid it up a bit. Okay, and probably we need another, let me move it. We need another one at the front and move it out a bit. Okay, now because perspective is enabled, it's pretty hard to judge how the feed is in the 3D space. So if you want to make sure that the guy is really standing on the ground, you want to turn off symmetry, turn off perspective, so pressing B to turn off perspective. Now I can check the heels and everything. So move it back. We want to make sure that the feet is lying flat on the ground. Okay, perspective again, F to zooming in. And yeah, this is the figure, it's nice. Okay, go A, that's a preview. Perspective, is it activated? It is. So just let me rotate around this stuff. So I'm selecting this bone and rotating around. And also rotate it outwards. Okay, now it's much more believable. Probably the knees should be a little bit forward, so slight angle. And probably we need a calf, so draw mode, and add a sphere, switch to scale, and create a calf. Right, W to move it, so that's it. Now we have a calf. And take a look at the preview. That's kind of a good preview. Now it is time to look at the fingers and how to create a hand. Now before we are creating the hand, let me scale up this joint a bit. So to make this gap a little bit smaller. Okay. Yeah. No, it is a little bit smaller, so it's much more realistic. The forearm is way too long, so pull it back a bit and rescale. Okay, now I'm adding the other parts for the fingers, so Q, and now let me show how a finger is created, or actually a hand is created, because when you are working with Z-spheres, you're creating multiple tiny Z-spheres. 2 at a time is okay now. I'm switching to move mode, rescale my brush size because it's way too much, and I'm pulling these out. And these are the fundamental joints for 2 fingers. But this is just the palm area, so it's not the thing. You don't want to create a big Z-sphere and then start tiny fingers. Usually you're starting from a smaller Z-sphere, create the fundamental bones for the palm, and then start the fingers from those first segments. Okay, so make it even smaller. Scale it down, go back to Q, create another one. I'm looking for an empty space because it's easier. Then I'm switching to the move mode and pulling it back front. Okay. I don't need any overlaps. It's possible if you move it too close, there will be an overlap. If you see an overlap, just make sure you check it. So if I'm pressing A, now I see it melts nicely, but I don't want to keep it melted. So let me scale it down. Another finger. Okay, so this will be the 4th finger, and also we need a thumb at the front. So I'm switching to move again, put it out, make it even smaller because this will be the pinky, and this will be the front. Just let me accurately model Q. Now here comes the thumb. It's way too big, so let me undo it. Alright, that's it. Now this is just the base, okay, so it's not the actual thumb yet. This is just the beginning, starting joint for the thumb. And now this is the palm of the hand. Okay, it is relatively small, so if I want to scale it up, I'm switching to scale and hold down. Oh, it scales up everything, but it's just not what I do need. So Let me scale them one by one. Okay, and then switch to move and pull them out a bit. Okay, check it from distance. Hitting A. Okay, now it's relatively good. Probably need to move it up a bit. A big size brush and move these things. Okay. A little bit stretchy, and that's it. So now that's the fundamental stuff for the hand. Let me create a tiny finger, pull it out. So that's one. Another one here, pull it out, spread them apart a bit. This one is okay. So there is a reason I don't create too many joints here, because it's much easier to add this joint later on. Preview. Okay, so these are welding here, and I can add more and more fingers. So A, go in, Q, create, V, W to move. Another finger is ready. Scale it up a bit. This joint is already fine. Move it to the position. So when you are moving your object, you have to look for the right orientation, the right angle of the screen. Otherwise, it's just you cannot. The easiest way to move away a sphere if you move it to the sideways. So you cannot pull it and push it relative to the camera. The easiest if you just select the right angle. So if you want to open up or close your hand, you have to go to the front. If you want to spread the fingers, you have to go to the side. So that's how it works. Okay, draw mode again, and create W, pull it up, make the corrections, and that will be the pinky. Scale it down. Okay, now this is my preview. That's fine. I think it's quite nice. So what I want to do, I want to add more joints, but before that, just let me complete the thumb. So draw mode, I have to look at different angle, so dragging it out, W for moving, and then another one. Okay, so we need another segment right here. It's a little bit different than the other fingers, so we have to make sure that we have enough segments in the front. Okay, so probably turn it back a bit. Alright, so that's technically a basic ZSphere hand with a ZSphere figure, and we will take a look at the details and how to manipulate and how to build up this to be a actual model. So see you next time. Thank you. Bye.